In the chill grip of a midnight fog rolling off the Baltic Sea, where the waves whisper secrets of drowned kings and splintered longships, imagine a time when a single crown held the fury of the North in its iron fist. Not the thunder of Viking raids, but the calculated storm of an empire that bent the winds to its will, turning humble fjords into fortresses of power and trade routes into rivers of gold. This is the saga of Denmark's forgotten dominion. When the Danes didn't just sail the seas, they ruled them, from the icy veins of Scandinavia to the sun-baked shores of the Mediterranean, their flags snapping defiantly against the gales of history. Welcome to the Forgotten Empire of the North. When Denmark ruled the seas, a journey into the shadows of a realm erased by time, where ambition clashed with betrayal, and the roar of cannon fire echoed the heartbeat of a nation that dared to claim the world as its own. As the first light of dawn pierced the mist-shrouded harbors of medieval Jutland, the year was 1018, and a young king named Harald Bluetooth, yes, the very man whose name would one day grace our wireless wonders, stood atop the weathered ramparts of his stone fortress at Jelling. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and salted cod, carried on winds that had journeyed from the distant fjords of Norway, where Harald's rivals still licked their wounds from a recent truce. Harald was no mere warlord. He was the architect of unity, the binder of fractious tribes into a single pulsating entity. With a cross carved into a massive runestone beside him, he declared Denmark Christian, not out of piety alone, but as a shrewd gambit to court the favor of the Holy Roman Empire and the silver-laden merchants of Saxony. Yet beneath this veneer of piety lay the pulse of conquest. Harald's eyes, sharp as the prows of his dragon-headed ships, scanned the horizon where the Kattegat Strait met the open sea, a gateway to realms untold. His fleet, some 200 longships strong, each a marvel of overlapping oak planks caulked with whale fat and propelled by oars that bit the water like the teeth of wolves, awaited his command. These were no crude raiders' vessels. They were engineered for endurance, shallow-drafted to skim coastal shallows and evade deeper water foes, their sails woven from wool-dyed blood red to strike terror into coastal villages from Friesland to the Faroes. Harald's ambition was born of necessity. Denmark, a patchwork of marshy islands and wind-lashed peninsulas, was hemmed in by giants. The Holy Roman Empire to the south, with its armored knights and papal blessings. Sweden's fractious jarls to the east, ever hungry for fertile Jutland soil, and Norway's storm kings to the north, whose sagas spoke of gods who feasted on the flesh of lesser men. To survive, Harald turned outward, his gaze fixed on the seas that both isolated and empowered his realm. In 965, he had crushed the last pagan uprising at the Battle of Fyrisvellir, not with brute force alone, but by allying with the Wendish Slavs, those seafaring traders whose amber roots stretched to Byzantium. Now, with Christianity as his shield, he launched expeditions that would etch Denmark's name into the annals of maritime might. Picture the scene. Rowers, their backs scarred from the lash of taskmasters, chanting rhythmic hymns in Old Norse as they pulled toward the Skagerrak, the narrow throat between Denmark and Norway. Harald's son, Sweyn Forkbeard, a man whose braided locks hid a mind as twisted as his namesake's weapon, commanded the vanguard. Sweyn was the fire to Harald's forge. Where his father built alliances, Sweyn forged empires through blood. In 986, Sweyn's fleet descended upon the British Isles like a biblical plague, sacking the monastery of Lindisfarne, not for gold, but to proclaim Denmark's reach beyond the North Sea's cradle. The longships sliced through the choppy waters with predatory grace, their keels groaning under the weight of mailed warriors clutching axes honed to split helmets like eggshells. As they neared the English coast, fog banks parted to reveal the thatched roofs of coastal hamlets, their inhabitants frozen in the torchlight flicker of evening prayers. Sweyn's strategy was merciless precision. Strike fast, demand Danegeld, the silver tribute that would fund further voyages, and vanish before the feared militias could muster. By 991, King Ethelred the Unready had paid the first installment, a staggering 10,000 pounds of silver, funneled directly into Danish shipyards, where carpenters labored under the aurora's eerie glow to berth vessels capable of carrying not just men, but horses, siege engines, and the seeds of Nordic law. This was no haphazard piracy. It was statecraft on salt spray, transforming Denmark from a peripheral backwater into a nexus of northern power. Back home, Harald leveraged these spoils to fortify his ring of defenses, the Danevirke, a colossal earth and timber wall snaking 30 kilometers across the Jutland Peninsula, its ditches filled with sharpened stakes and patrolled by archers whose arrows whispered death to any Saxon scout who dared peek over the ramparts. The wall wasn't just stone. It was a statement, a bulwark that screamed to the world, "The North has awakened, and its empire begins at the water's edge." Yet empire building was a siren's song, seductive and treacherous. As Sweyn's raids escalated, whispers of rebellion stirred in the halls of Roskilde, where Harald's queens, Gunhild, the Norwegian sorceress with eyes like storm clouds, and Thora, the Jutland noblewoman whose dowry included vast flax fields, plotted in the smoke-filled longhouses. Harald's conversion to Christianity had alienated the old gods' faithful, those skalds who sang of Thor's hammer shattering Jormungandr, not some nailed carpenter from the south. In 986, the pot boiled over. A coalition of pagan jarls, backed by disgruntled Norwegian kin, ambushed Harald during a feast at Odense. Poisoned mead and hidden daggers felled the king, his body crumpling amid the clamor of overturned benches and spilled boar haunches. Sweyn, ever the opportunist, seized the throne not through grief but through guile, marrying the widowed Gunhild to consolidate power and launching immediate reprisals that left rebel strongholds as smoldering husks along the Limfjord. Under Sweyn, Denmark's maritime reach exploded. By 1000, his fleets had probed the edges of the known world. Exploratory voyages to Greenland under his kinsman Leif Erikson, who bartered walrus ivory for Frankish wine, diplomatic envoys to the courts of Kiev, where Varangian guards, Danish mercenaries in Byzantine service, swore fealty to the Rus princes while smuggling Baltic amber back home. Sweyn's crowning achievement came in 1013, when he crossed the North Sea with an armada of 200 ships, their hulls black with pitch and emblazoned with raven banners that seemed to flap with unholy life. Landing at Sandwich, he marched on London, the city's wooden palisades crumbling under a barrage of Greek fire, an incendiary concoction traded from Moorish contacts in Iberia, its flames leaping like vengeful spirits across the Thames. Ethelred fled to Normandy, his court aflutter with Norman spies who would one day claim the English crown themselves. Sweyn's coronation at Gainsborough Cathedral was a spectacle of Nordic pomp, skalds reciting verses that blended Beowulf's alliterative thunder with Latin hymns, while Danish housecarls, clad in chainmail forged in Ribe's smoky smithies, stood sentinel over a populace cowed into submission. Danegeld flowed like mead at a Yule feast, 36,000 pounds in a single year, enough to double the Danish fleet and commission the first purpose-built Nars, cargo ships whose bulging bellies hauled timber from Norway, furs from Novgorod, and slaves from the Slav markets of Burka. Denmark was no longer a raider's lair. It was a thalassocracy, a sea empire where the king's word rippled across waves from the Orkneys to the Outer Hebrides. But glory's tide turned swift as a squall. Sweyn's death in 1014, struck down by dysentery in a Lincolnshire camp, left his son Knut, a boy of 18 with a beard like spun gold and a temper forged in the forges of vengeance, thrust upon a throne of thorns. Knut the Great, as history would dub him, inherited not just Denmark but the fractious loyalties of England and the simmering hatreds of Norway. His first act was a masterstroke of maritime diplomacy. Sailing back to Denmark with the bulk of his fleet intact, he dispersed tribute to loyal jarls, binding them with oaths sworn over sacred rings hammered from Thor's own anvil, even as he dispatched missionaries to convert the holdouts. Knut's vision was panoramic. He saw the North Sea not as a barrier, but as a highway uniting his realms. From his base in Roskilde Fjord, where the waters lapped at the roots of ancient yew trees said to house the Norns loom, he orchestrated trade convoys that snaked through the Øresund toll stations, choke points where Danish tacksmen, armed with ledgers as sharp as their swords, exacted duties on every barrel of herring and bolt of Flemish cloth. These tolls funded academies in Lund, where monks illuminated manuscripts blending runic lore with Carolingian script, and arsenals in Schleswig that birthed the first clinker-built cogs, hybrid vessels blending Viking agility with Hanseatic capacity. Knut's fleets became instruments of imperial harmony. In 1016, he reconquered England after a brutal winter campaign, his ships wintering in the Orwell estuary, their crews surviving on smoked eel and tales of Valhalla to stave off scurvy. Olaf Haraldsson of Norway, a Christian zealot with a penchant for branding pagans' foreheads with crosses, challenged Cnut's northern flank, but Cnut countered with subtlety, subsidies to Scottish thanes to pinch Olaf from the west, and a naval blockade of the Norwegian coast that starved Trondheim's granaries. By 1028, at the Battle of the Helgeo River, Cnut's armada, 300 vessels strong, their prows carved into snarling leviathans, shattered Olaf's coalition. The river ran red, not with blood alone, but with the ink of surrender treaties that ceded Norwegian tribute to Denmark's coffers. Cnut's empire now spanned 2,000 miles of coastline, a watery dominion where Danish law, the Jyske Lov, codified in 1020 with provisions for shipwright and stranding claims, governed from Dublin's slave markets to Pomerania's amber beaches. Pilgrims whispered of his court in Jelling, a floating palace of tapestries depicting sea serpents coiling around the tree of life, where skalds like Sigvatur Thordarson composed verses that echoed through the ages. The king who tamed the tempest, whose keels kiss every shore, yet even as Knut's shadow lengthened, cracks spiderwebbed through the hull of his realm. His harem of wives, Emma of Normandy, whose French intrigues sweetened trade with Rouen, Elfgifu of Northampton, whose English bloodlines quelled Anglo-Saxon unrest, bred rival heirs whose ambitions churned like undertows. Magnus the Good, Knut's Norwegian scion, chafed under the Danish yoke, while in England, Godwin of Wessex plotted with the subtlety of a coiling asp. Cnut's grandest voyage, a pilgrimage to Rome in 1027 for the coronation of Conrad II, saw him parading through the Eternal City with a retinue of Northmen whose axes gleamed under St. Peter's gaze. He petitioned the Pope for exemptions on English Peter's pence and Danish tolls on German pilgrims, securing papal bulls that burnished his Christian credentials. But absence bred discontent. Back home, Jarls feasted on pilfered levies, their long hauls ringing with boasts of independent raids. Cnut's return fleet, laden with relics of Byzantine silk, was harried by Frisian pirates off Texel, a skirmish that foreshadowed the unraveling. In 1035, Cnut succumbed to illness in Shaftesbury Abbey, his body interred in Winchester amid chants of the Te Deum. But his spirit lingered in the salt winds that carried word of his death across the North Sea like a funeral dirge. The empire fragmented with the finality of a shattered oar. Magnus, barely 11, claimed Norway with Olaf's son as a puppet. But Denmark splintered under the weak rule of Harthacnut, Knut's son by Emma, whose fleets patrolled the Skagerrak more for show than substance. English earls rebelled, crowning Edward the Confessor in 1042, severing the western limb with a stroke of the sword at the Battle of Asandun's Echo. Sweden, under the Stenkil dynasty, asserted independence by blockading the Öresund, starving Danish markets of iron and turning the once vibrant trade lanes into ghost routes haunted by derelict hulks. By 1066, as Harald Hardrada, last of the Viking kings, sailed his longships to Stamford Bridge in a doomed bid for England's throne, Denmark watched from afar, its naval might reduced to coastal patrols against Wendish corsairs. The Kalmar Union of 1397 would later attempt to resurrect northern hegemony under Danish crowns, but that was a pale shadow, a bureaucratic web spun from the threads of faded glory. Margaret the Furs, the Semiramis of the north, forged it through marriage and machination. Her fleets, now carracks with towering castles fore and aft, dominating the Baltic cod fisheries and Hansa fairs. But even she could not stem the tide of Reformation wars that pitted Lutheran Denmark against Catholic Sweden in blood-soaked decades. Flash forward to the 17th century, when Christian IV, Denmark's Renaissance king, with a beard like a falcon's wing and eyes that burned with alchemical fire, resurrected the maritime dream. His Copenhagen, transformed from a muddy fishing village into a bastion of brick and basalt, bristled with arsenals where Dutch shipwrights crafted the sleek frigates that would challenge Dutch hegemony in the sound dues. Christian sound toll registers, meticulous ledgers spanning 1497 to 1857, chronicled an empire of tariffs. Every ship passing the Öresund paid homage, from spice galleons bound for Amsterdam to timber barges from Riga, amassing a fortune that funded the Rosenborg treasury's glittering hoards. In 1627, at the Battle of Oliwa in the Gulf of Danzig, Danish Admiral Niels Gude's squadron smashed a Polish fleet, their broadsides thundering like Thor's wrath, securing Pomeranian ports for a fleeting Baltic ascendancy. Yet the 30 Years' War ground Denmark's ambitions to dust. Christian's ill-fated invasion of the Holy Roman Empire in 1625 ended in the catastrophe of Luther am Barenberger, where Wallenstein's imperialists routed the Danish horse, leaving the king's forces to limp home across despoiled fields. The Treaty of Lübeck stripped Denmark of its German enclaves, and subsequent Torstensson's scorched earth campaigns by Swedish forces in 1644 raised Jutland's farms, turning the breadbasket of the north into a famine-ravaged waste. Undeterred, Denmark pivoted to colonial seas. In 1620, Christian IV dispatched the Greenland expedition under Captain Poul Egede, whose barks braved the Davis Strait ice floes to reclaim Norse settlements abandoned since the 14th century. Whaling stations sprang up along Disco Bay, where Inuit kayaks bartered narwhal tusks for iron tools, and Danish factors tallied blubber yields that lit Europe's lamps. Further south, the Danish West India Company, chartered in 1671, planted flags on St. Thomas and St. John in the Caribbean, their plantations churning sugar from African slave labor into molasses rivers that sweetened Copenhagen's coffee houses. Tranquebar in India, seized in 1620, became a pepper emporium where Fort Dansborg's cannons saluted VOC rivals, while the Gold Coast forts at Osu traded slaves for the cannon that armed the home fleet. These ventures were veins of empire, pumping wealth into a kingdom that dreamed of global sinews, but they were brittle. The Great Northern War of 1700-1721 pitted Denmark against a Swedish colossus. Charles the Orythinus Caroleans marching to Poltava's fields while Danish ships blockaded Gothenburg, only to shatter against superior Swedish galleys at Dynekalen in 1716, where the waters ran thick with splintered timber and drowned drummers. The 19th century brought the death knell. The loss of Norway in 1814, severed by the Treaty of Kiel amid Napoleonic fallout, gutted Denmark's northern flank, leaving it a middling power adrift in a world of ironclads and steam. The Second Schleswig War of 1864 was the coup de grace. Prussian and Austrian artillery pulverized the Danish defenses at Dibble, the redoubts crumbling under rifled Krupp guns as the windmills atop the hills spun indifferently. Denmark's fleet, outdated sail-of-the-line relics, cowered in Copenhagen harbor, unable to contest the Baltic. The cession of Schleswig-Holstein to Bismarck's Germany amputated the Jutland spirit, the Danevirke's ancient wall now a quaint relic for tourists, its ramparts overgrown with nettles. Yet in defeat, Denmark reinvented itself, not as sea lords, but as social pioneers, their cooperatives and folk high schools weaving a cultural tapestry from the frayed sails of empire. Today, as you stand on the quays of Helsingør, where Hamlet's ghost once pondered the ramparts of Elsinore, the Øresund Bridge hums with traffic, linking Denmark to Sweden in a union of asphalt and steel. Submerged wrecks off Anholt Island, probed by divers amid schools of cod, yield runestones etched with tales of Knut's voyages, their letters softened by centuries of brine. Museums in Roskilde cradle the skeletal remains of Skuldelev's ships, reconstructed hulls that creak under the weight of imagined oarsmen, while the National Maritime Museum in Kronborg displays astrolabes and logbooks from Tranquebar captains. The empire is forgotten not because it lacked grandeur, but because history favors the victors. The British with their pink-tinged maps, the Dutch with their spice monopolies, who eclipsed the Danish star. But listen closely to the gull's cry over the Kattegat, and you'll hear the echo, a realm that ruled the seas not through endless conquest, but through the cunning marriage of wave and will, a northern phoenix that rose on salt foam and fell to the inexorable pull of time. The empire did not die with Knut. It merely changed its skin, sloughing off the old like a serpent shedding scales in the spring thaw of the Baltic. When the great king's body was lowered into the crypt at Winchester, the North Sea itself seemed to hold its breath, the wind dropping to a mournful sigh across the fjords. The raven banners that had snapped so fiercely above the decks of 1,000 longships now hung limp in the salt, heavy air. Yet the blood of the Sea Kings still pulsed in the veins of Denmark. Harthacnut, Cnut's son by Emma of Normandy, took the throne in 1035 with the weight of 2 crowns pressing upon his brow, one Danish, one English, and the ghosts of his father's conquests whispering in every wave that lapped the hulls of the royal fleet. He was a man of 20, lean as a ship's mast, with eyes the color of winter ice and a temper that could flare hotter than Greek fire. His first act was to sail for England with 40 ships, their prows carved into snarling wolves, to claim the inheritance that had slipped through his fingers while he lingered in Roskilde. The crossing was brutal. A late autumn storm tore at the sails, ripping wool from the yards and snapping oars like kindling. But Harthacnut's voice rose above the gale, steady as the keel beneath his feet, promising his housecarls that the sea itself would bow to the son of Nut. They made landfall at Sandwich under a sky the color of bruised steel, and the English coast trembled. Harthacnut rode inland with 1,000 mailed men, their chainmail clinking like coins in a miser's purse, and the earls who had dared to crown Edward the Confessor in his absence bent the knee or fled to the fens. In London, the Thames was choked with Danish hulls, their dragon heads leering at the wooden bridges as if to devour the city whole. Harthacnut's coronation in Canterbury was a spectacle of northern splendor, skalds chanting in the old tongue while Frankish monks intoned Latin psalms, the air thick with incense and the tang of blood from the sacrificial oxen slaughtered on the cathedral steps. He levied a Danegeld of £21,000, enough silver to plate the ribs of a dozen new warships, and sent it north to the shipyards of Ribe, where the smell of pine tar and hot iron never slept. But England was a jealous mistress. The tax collectors were hated, their ledgers torn from their hands and burned in the market squares of Winchester and York. In 1041, 2 of Harthacnut's men were dragged from a tavern in Worcester and stoned to death by a mob drunk on ale and resentment. The king's response was swift and terrible. He ordered the shire burned, the fields salted, the wells poisoned. The smoke rose black against the winter sky, a funeral pyre for the last flicker of the Anglo-Danish Empire. Harthacnut himself did not live to see the ashes cool. In June 1042, at a wedding feast in Lambeth, he raised a toast to the bride, his cup brimming with Rhenish wine, and collapsed mid-sentence, his body convulsing as if struck by Thor's hammer. The hall fell silent save for the crackle of the hearth and the distant lapping of the Thames against the wharves. Poison, some whispered. The wrath of English saints, said others. He was 24. His body was carried back to Denmark in a lead-lined coffin aboard the Royal Nar-Hrafen, its black sail furled in mourning and buried beside his father in Roskilde Cathedral, where the stone effigies of sea kings stared down with sightless eyes. With his death, the North Sea Union shattered like ice under a keel. Edward the Confessor reclaimed England, purging the Danish court with the zeal of a monk scrubbing heathen runes from a church wall. In Norway, Magnus the Good, Harthacnut's cousin and rival, seized the moment, sailing south with a fleet of 200 ships to claim Denmark itself. The Battle of Lurskov Heath in 1043 was a slaughter. Danish housecarls, their shields painted with the red lion of Knut, stood in a wall of iron against the Norwegian onslaught. But Magnus's archers loosed volley after volley until the field was a quilt of feathered shafts and broken bodies. Denmark bent the knee, and for a decade, the Norwegian wolf prowled the Kattegat unopposed. Yet the Danish spirit is not so easily drowned. In the longhouses of Jutland, skalds sang of Svein Estridsson, Harthacnut's cousin, a bastard son of Knut's sister with a mind sharp as a whalebone needle and a beard the color of ripe wheat. Exiled to Sweden during Magnus's reign, Svein bided his time in the courts of Uppsala, learning the arts of diplomacy from Queen Astrid and the craft of shipbuilding from Varangian exiles who had sailed the Volga to Miklagard. In 1047, Magnus died hunting in the forests of Zealand, some said by a fall from his horse, others by a Danish arrow, and Sweyn struck. He landed at Slicethorpe with a fleet of Frisian cogs, their holds stuffed with silver from the Hansa towns, and their decks bristling with mercenaries from Flanders and Saxony. The Jarls flocked to his banner, lured by promises of loot and the old dream of a Denmark that ruled the waves. By 1050 he had driven the Norwegians back across the Skagerrak, and in the fjord of Roskilde he was crowned beneath a canopy of whalebone and walrus ivory, the bishops of Lund and Ribe anointing him with oil that smelled of myrrh and seal blubber. Svein Estridsson's reign would span 36 years, a golden age of consolidation when Denmark licked its wounds and sharpened its claws for the next leap. He began with the sea. The shipyards of Aalborg and Aarhus rang day and night, birthing a new breed of vessel. The bus, a broad-beamed cog with a single square sail and a castle aft for archers, capable of hauling 100 tons of cargo or 100 warriors with equal ease. Sweyn's fleet grew to 300 sail, their hulls caulked with sheep's wool and pine tar, their masts stepped with the precision of a surgeon setting a bone. He reimposed the sound dues with a vengeance, stationing war galleys at Helsingør and Helsingborg to board every merchantman that dared the narrows. The toll registers of the 1050s are a litany of wealth: 1,200 marks from a Genoese carrack laden with alum, 800 from a Flemish wool convoy, 500 from a Novgorod nar stuffed with sable and wax. The silver flowed into the royal coffers, and from there into the stone churches that rose like dragon's teeth across the landscape: Roskild's triple apses, Viborg's soaring nave, the cathedral at Lund, where Absalon would one day be consecrated archbishop. Sweyn married wisely and often. Gunhild of Sweden bore him sons who would fight like wolves. Elisiv of Kiev brought Varangian guards who taught Danish shipwrights the secret of the Greek fire siphon. Richeza of Poland opened the amber roads to the south. His court at Ringsted was a babel of tongues: Norse, Slavic, Latin, Wendish, where skalds composed lays of the Sea Kings, while monks copied the Gesta Danorum by candlelight. But empire is a hungry beast, and swine fed it with blood. In 1062 he launched the Wendish Crusade, a holy war blessed by Pope Alexander II and financed by the Hansa. The Wends, Slavic tribes along the southern Baltic coast, had long raided Danish shores, their swift prams slipping through the reeds to burn villages and carry off children. Sweyn's fleet, led by the bishop absolutist Eskil of Lund, sailed under crimson crosses and raven banners, 500 ships strong. They struck at Rügen first, the island fortress where the four-faced god Svantovit gazed out over the sea from his temple of oak and gold. The Danes stormed the beaches at dawn, their war cries mingling with the screams of gulls, and the temple burned for 3 days, its smoke a black pillar visible from Bornholm. The high priest, his beard singed and his eyes wild, was dragged before Sweyn and offered the choice: baptism or the axe. He chose the axe, and his blood soaked the sand as the Danish host sang the Te Deum. Arkona fell next. Its walls, breached by siege towers, rolled ashore on sledges of whalebone. The loot was staggering: idols of solid silver, coffers of Byzantine gold, slaves by the thousand. Sweyn parceled out the conquered lands to his loyal jarls. Absalon got the island of Mön. Esbern Snare the dunes of Falster, and the Wendish coast became a Danish march, its ports flying the 3 blue lions on gold. The Crusade's success emboldened Sweyn to look west again. In 1069 he sent his son, Knut, later Saint Knut, to England with a fleet of 200 ships, ostensibly to aid the northern rebels against William the Conqueror. The Danes landed in the Humber, their longships grounding on the mud flats like a flight of iron birds. And for a season they ravaged Yorkshire, burning the minster at York and carrying off the relics of St. Oswald. But William bought them off with 4,000 marks and a promise of trade privileges in London, and Knut sailed home with empty holds and a bitter taste in his mouth. The dream of reconquering England died hard, but it died. Sweyn turned inward, fortifying the Danevirke with stone facing and watchtowers, dredging the fjords to accommodate deeper drafted ships, and founding the Ting assemblies where freemen argued law over barrels of ale. His death in 1074, at the age of 55, struck down by a fever in the marshes of Sønderjylland, was mourned from Greenland to Garda. His 5 sons divided the realm like wolves tearing a carcass, and for a generation Denmark bled in civil war, brother against brother, ship against ship, until Niels, the youngest, emerged bloodied but victorious in 1104, his beard streaked with gray and his eyes hollow as the hull of a burned galley. Niels's reign was a twilight, a long exhale before the storm. He married Margaret Fredkulla of Sweden, the Peace Maiden, and for a decade the North Sea lanes lay open, the herring fleets of Scania hauling in silver-scaled bounty that fed half of Europe. But the Jarls grew fat and restless, and in 1131 Knut Lavard, Niels's nephew, Duke of Schleswig, and a man whose charisma could charm the gulls from the sky, was murdered in Haraldstead Forest by his cousin Magnus. The deed was done with a sword thrust beneath the ribs as Knut knelt to drink from a spring. and the blood that soaked the moss was the spark that ignited the civil war of 1131–1157. Denmark tore itself apart, Zealand against Jutland, Skåne against Funen, the church against the crown. Fleets burned in the Great Belt, their masts toppling like felled pines. Villages were put to the torch until the smoke blotted out the sun. Valdemar, Knut Lavard's son, a boy of 12 when his father died, grew into a warrior whose axe was named Skufnung after the legendary blade of Norse myth. In 1157, at the Battle of Grada Heath, he faced the combined armies of Swinegrada and the pretender Knud Magnusson. The field was a morass of mud and blood, the clash of steel drowned by the screams of the dying. Valdemar's housecarls held the center, their shields locked in a wall that no charge could break, and when the sun set, the heath was littered with the bodies of kings. Sweyn was hacked to pieces beneath his banner. Knud fled to the marshes and drowned, and Valdemar stood alone amid the carnage, his mail rent and his face streaked with gore, the last heir of Knut's blood. Valdemar the Great was crowned in Roskilde in 1157, and the empire stirred from its long sleep. He was a man of iron and vision, tall as a ship's mast, with a voice that could still a storm and a mind that saw the sea as Denmark's birthright. His first act was to rebuild the fleet. 200 new buses launched from the slips of Nakskov, their hulls sheathed in oak and their sails dyed the deep blue of the Danish arms. He allied with the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, marrying his sister Sophia and gaining imperial recognition for Danish claims in the Baltic. In 1168, he turned east again, this time with Absalon, now Archbishop of Lund and the Hammer of the Vends at his side. Their target was Rügen once more, but this time the island was held by the Rügen prince Jaromar, a Christian convert who paid tribute in falcons and amber. Valdemar demanded more, the island itself. The fleet sailed under a sky of bruised purple, the oars biting the water in perfect unison, and when they beached at Cape Arcona, the Rügen host was waiting on the cliffs, their spears glinting like frost. The battle was short and brutal. Danish crossbowmen loosed volley after volley until the cliff edge was a carpet of feathered shafts. Then the housecarls charged, their war cries echoing off the chalk cliffs. Jaromar knelt in the surf, his crown of gold offered up on the point of Valdemar's sword, and Rügen became a Danish fief. The temple of Svantovit was razed to the ground. Its stones used to build the church of St. Mary in Gars. And the four-faced idol was dragged through the streets of Roskilde behind a cart, its wooden eyes staring sightlessly at the jeering crowds. Valdemar's empire now stretched from the Elbe to the Gulf of Finland, a crescent of power hugging the southern Baltic shore. He founded Copenhagen, København, the merchant's harbor, in 1167, a muddy fishing village transformed into a fortified port where the toll houses never closed and the quays groaned under the weight of Hanseatic cogs. The sound dues reached their medieval peak, 12,000 marks in a single year, enough to gild the spire of Roskilde Cathedral and commission the Valdemar Atterdag, a flagship of 400 tons with a crew of 200 and cannon cast in Lübeck. Valdemar's laws were carved into the Jyske-lov of 1241, a code that governed everything from the stranding of whales to the punishment of pirates. Its clauses read aloud in every ting from Thisted to Tallinn. He died in 1182, struck by an arrow during a hunt in Gura Forest, his body carried back to Ringsted in a coffin of cedar and laid beside his father beneath a slab of blue limestone. His son, not the sixth, inherited a realm at the zenith of its power, the seas its highways, the winds its heralds, the ravens its scouts. Knut VI ruled for 20 years. A king whose court was a riot of color and sound. Flemish tapestries depicting the labors of the months, Icelandic falcons hooded in scarlet leather, Wendish dancers whirling to the drone of the hurdy-gurdy. He crushed the Pomeranian dukes in 1185, forcing Bogislav to kneel in the dust of Wolgast and swear fealty beneath the Danish banner. The fleet that enforced this submission was a wonder. 300 sail, their prows gilded and their sails painted with the arms of every conquered province. In 1190, he joined the Third Crusade, not with armies but with ships. Danish galleys ferried German knights to Acre, their holds stuffed with salted pork and barrels of Skåne herring, and in return the emperor granted trading privileges in Lübeck and Hamburg. The Baltic became a Danish lake, its ports flying the Three Lions, its merchants speaking Danish as the lingua franca from Reval to Rouen. but the empire's very size was its weakness. When Nut died in 1202, childless, his body wasted by a fever caught in the marshes of Rügen, the crown passed to his brother Valdemar II, called the Victorious, a man whose ambition burned brighter than the northern lights. Valdemar II's reign was the empire's apogee and its swan song. In 1201, he launched the Livonian Crusade, sailing up the Daugava with a fleet of 500 ships to plant the Danish flag on the dunes of Estonia. The Battle of Lindenice in 1219 was a miracle. As the Estonian host charged, their war cries shaking the pine forests, a crimson banner bearing a white cross fell from the heavens, or so the chroniclers claimed, into the hands of Archbishop Anders Sunesen. The Danes rallied, their axes cleaving pagan skulls, and by nightfall the field was theirs. Tallinn, Tani Linn, the Danish castle, was founded on the blood-soaked ground, its walls rising like a challenge to the Teutonic knights, who coveted the same shores. Valdemar's empire now touched the edges of Rus, its merchants bartering wax and honey for Arab silver in the markets of Novgorod. The Liber Census Danii, compiled in 1231, lists more than 200 royal manors, 300 churches, and 60 castles, a realm richer than England and more populous than Sweden. The fleet numbered 600 sail, its admirals bearing titles like Staller Imaris and Drabanter, their logbooks written in a Latin peppered with Norse seafaring terms. But hubris is a storm that gathers slowly. In 1223, Valdemar and his son were captured on the island of Liu by Count Heinrich of Schwerin, a vassal-turned-traitor lured by promises of imperial gold. For 2 years they languished in the dungeons of Dannenberg, the king's beard growing long and gray, his son's eyes hollow with despair. Denmark paid a ransom of 45,000 marks silver, 1,000 silk garments, and the promise to abandon all claims north of the Elbe. The empire cracked along its seams. Pomerania revolted. Estonia was lost to the Sword Brothers. The Hansa towns closed their gates. Valdemar returned in 1225, a broken man, his fleet reduced to shadows, his treasury empty. He spent his last years rebuilding, launching the Codex Holmiensis to preserve Danish law, and founding the fortress of Kalundborg, with its 5 towers like fingers clutching the sky. He died in 1241, his body carried to Ringsted in a procession of black-clad monks, the bells of every church in Zealand tolling until the sound merged with the wind in the reeds. The empire did not fall in a day, nor in a decade. It bled out slowly like a whale harpooned and left to drift. Valdemar's sons fought over the scraps, Eric Plovpenning murdered in 1250 by his brother Abel, whose drowned corpse was found weighted with chains in the Schlei Fjord. Christopher I poisoned in 1259 by a communion wafer laced with arsenic. The church grew fat on royal grants, the nobility on confiscated estates, the peasantry on nothing but the salt of their tears. By 1300, the fleet was a memory. Its ships rotted at the wharves or sold to the Hansa for a pittance. The sound dues still flowed, but into foreign coffers. The Kalmar Union of 1397, Margaret the Ern's masterstroke, promised a resurrection, uniting Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under a single crown. For a century it held, its fleets patrolling the herring grounds of Scania and the iron roots of Bergslagen. But it was a union of paper and pride, not blood and iron. The Battle of Brunkeberg in 1471 saw Swedish rebels under Sten Sture shatter the Danish host on the ice of Lake Mälaren, and the dream of northern hegemony died with the screams of the dying. Yet the sea remembers. In the cellars of Kronborg Castle, the logs of the Sound Toll still molder, their pages yellowed with the ink of centuries. In the fjords of Roskilde, the reconstructed longships creak at their moorings, their oars dipping in perfect unison as schoolchildren pull with the ghosts of housecarls. In the amber shops of Gdansk, necklaces carved with the 3 lions gleam under electric lights, and in the bars of Tallinn, old men still toast Tajani Kuningas with aquavit that burns like the fires of Lindenice. The empire is forgotten by textbooks and treaties, but not by the tides. Every wave that breaks on the dunes of Skagen carries a fragment of the story. A splinter of oak from a sunken gnar, a shard of pottery from a Wendish hearth, a whisper of a skald's song. Denmark ruled the seas once, not with the brute force of Rome or the gold of Spain, but with the cunning of the raven and the patience of the gull. And in the long night of the north, when the aurora dances green and gold above the Kattegat, the ghosts of the Sea Kings still sail, their dragon prows cutting the mist, their voices rising in a chant that the wind carries south to the cities that never knew their names. The Kalmar Union was born in blood and parchment, sealed on a June day in 1397 beneath the vaulted ribs of the stone church at Kalmar, where the air hung heavy with beeswax candles and the salt breath of the Baltic drifting through open lancets. Margaret the Rye, the Semiramis of the North, stood at the center of it all, a woman of 44 whose black velvet gown absorbed the light like a raven's wing, and whose eyes, pale as winter fjords, had seen more thrones topple than most men ever dream of. She had buried 2 husbands, outlived a son, and wrested Denmark from the jaws of German counts and Swedish rebels with the patience of a spider spinning silk across a chasm. Now she held the crowns of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden in her slender hands, and the nobles of the 3 realms knelt on the flagstones to swear fealty beneath a canopy of crimson and gold. The Union Charter was read aloud in Latin, Danish, and Swedish, its clauses binding the kingdoms in a web of mutual defense and shared succession. But every man in that church knew the truth. Margaret ruled, and the North would bow to her will or break upon it. She wasted no time. Within a year, her fleets, 300 sail strong, their hulls painted the deep blue of the Danish arms and their sails stitched with the crowned stockfish of Norway, patrolled the Øresund like wolves on a frozen lake. The sound dues were her lifeblood, exacted with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Every ship that passed Helsingør paid, a noble of silver for a Genoese carrack, a mark for a Lübeck cog, a barrel of wine for a Frisian bus. The toll houses never slept. Clerks hunched over ledgers by whale oil lamps, their quills scratching the names of captains and the weight of their cargoes, while armed guards paced the quays with halberds glinting in the torchlight. The money flowed into Copenhagen, transforming the muddy fishing village into a city of brick and ambition. Margaret founded the university in 1479, its first stone laid by her own hand, and the bells of Our Lady Church rang out across the harbor to announce the birth of a northern renaissance. Skåne's herring fleets hauled in silver-scaled bounty that fed half of Europe, and the iron mines of Bergslagen clanged day and night to arm the Union's galleys. But the Union was a marriage of convenience, and convenience breeds resentment. In Sweden, the Stura family chafed under Danish tax collectors, their longhouses ringing with boasts of ancient freedoms. In 1471, Sten Sture the Elder raised the banner of rebellion at Brunkeberg, just outside Stockholm. The battle was fought on ice. Swedish peasants with pikes and Danish knights in plate armor, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Margaret's nephew, King Hans, led the Union host, his horse slipping on the frozen lake as arrows hissed overhead like winter hornets. The Swedes held the ridge, their crossbowmen loosing volley after volley until the ice cracked beneath the weight of the dead. Hans fled across the frozen strait, his armor dented and his pride in tatters, and for a decade the Union teetered on the edge of dissolution. Margaret died in 1412 aboard her flagship in Flensburg Fjord, struck down by plague as she sailed to crush a fresh revolt. Her body was carried ashore wrapped in cloth of gold, and the bells of every church in the north tolled for 3 days, their sound rolling across the waves like a funeral dirge for the dream she had forged. The Union limped on under her successors, a 3-legged beast that lurched from crisis to crisis. Christian I, the first Oldenburg king, pawned the Orkney and Shetland Isles to Scotland in 1468 for a dowry he could not pay. Watching the Raven banners hauled down over Kirkwall as Danish sailors wept into their ale. His son Hans tried to reconquer Sweden in 1501, landing at Kalmar with a fleet of 200 ships, their prows carved into snarling lions. The siege lasted a year. The walls of the castle crumbled under bombard fire and the city burned, but the Swedish garrison held until winter frostbite did what cannon could not. Hans withdrew, his fleet battered by storms and his treasury empty. The sound dues still flowed, but now they funded German mercenaries and Italian condottieri rather than Danish shipyards. By 1520, Christian II, called the Tyrant, sat the throne, a man whose charm could seduce a nun and whose cruelty could flay a bishop alive. He dreamed of a Baltic Empire to rival the Hanseatic League, and in 1520 he sailed for Stockholm with 40 ships to crush the latest Stura rebellion. The Stockholm bloodbath followed. On November 8, 1520, Christian invited the Swedish nobility to a feast in the great hall of Tre Kronor Castle. The wine was Rhenish, The boar roasted with apples, and the skald sang of union and brotherhood. Then the doors slammed shut, and the axes fell. 82 nobles and burghers were dragged into the square, their heads struck off on a wooden block as the snow began to fall. The blood soaked the cobblestones and froze into crimson ice, and the heads were piled in a pyramid beneath the castle walls. Sweden rose in fury. Gustav Vasa, a young noble who had escaped the massacre disguised as a peasant, rallied the Dalecarlian miners and marched south. Christian's fleet blockaded the Mälaren, but the ice betrayed him. Swedish sledges crossed the frozen lake under cover of night, and by spring 1523 Stockholm was in rebel hands. Christian fled to the Netherlands, his crown lost and his name cursed from Skåne to Lapland. The Kalmar Union shattered, its fragments drifting apart like ice floes in the spring thaw. Denmark kept Norway and the North Atlantic islands, but the dream of a northern empire was dead. The Reformation swept in like a winter storm. Christian III, son of the deposed Frederick I, embraced Luther in 1536, confiscating church lands and melting cathedral bells into cannon. The fleet was reborn under the evangelical banner, sleek frigates with high castles and broadside batteries, their hulls sheathed in copper and their sails painted with the Dannebrog, the crimson flag with the white cross that had fallen from heaven at Lindenisse. Copenhagen became a Protestant bastion, its quays crowded with refugee printers from Antwerp and theologians from Wittenberg. The sound dues reached new heights. In 1560, 8,000 ships paid toll, their captains cursing the Danish tacksmen even as they filled the royal coffers. Christian III died in 1559, his body laid in Roskilde beneath a slab carved with the words Dominus Maris, Lord of the Sea, a title that rang hollow as the century wore on. His son Frederick II ruled for a generation, a king whose beard was the color of ripe barley and whose passions were falconry and fortification. He built Kronborg Castle at Helsingør, its walls rising from the surf like the prow of a stone ship, its cannon saluting every vessel that dared the Narrows. The castle's great hall echoed with the music of viols and the laughter of courtiers, but beneath the revelry lay the clank of chains and the groans of prisoners in the dungeons. Frederick's fleet grew to 60 sail, their admirals bearing names like Herluf Trolle and Peter Skram, men who had learned war in the school of the Dutch Revolt. In 1563, the Northern Seven Years' War erupted, Denmark and Lübeck against Sweden. The fleets clashed off Bornholm in 1564, the water boiling with cannon smoke and the screams of the drowning. Danish fireships drifted into the Swedish line, their holds stuffed with pitch and sulfur, and for a night the Baltic burned. The war ended in stalemate at Stettin in 1570. The sound dues divided, and the dream of Baltic dominion deferred. Frederick's son Christian IV was the last great sea king, a Renaissance prince whose ambition outstripped his purse. Crowned in 1588 at the age of 11, he grew into a man whose energy could power a fleet. He founded the Danish East India Company in 1616, its charter sealed with wax the color of blood, and sent the Øresund to Tranquebar in 1620, with a hold full of silver and a crew of dreamers. The fort of Dansborg rose on the Coromandel coast, its walls baked red by the Indian sun, its cannon saluting the pepper ships that sailed for Copenhagen laden with spice and slaves. Christian built the round tower in Copenhagen, its spiral ramp wide enough for a horse and cart, and the arsenal where Dutch shipwrights crafted frigates with lines as graceful as a gull's wing. His fleet numbered 100 sail in 1625, their prows gilded and their sails stitched with the crowned C4. He dreamed of a northern armada to rival Spain and the Netherlands, but the 30 Years' War devoured his dreams. In 1625, Christian invaded the Holy Roman Empire, his army of Scots and Germans marching south to defend the Protestant cause. The fleet sailed to the Elbe, its mission to blockade the Catholic ports, but Wallenstein's Imperials crushed the Danes at Lutter am Barenberg in 1626. The king fled across the heath, his horse lathered and his armor dented, while the fleet lay idle in the fjords. The Peace of Lübeck in 1629 stripped Denmark of its German enclaves, and the Sound dues became the only lifeline. Christian turned to the Arctic, sending expeditions to Greenland under Jens Munk, whose crew starved in the ice of Hudson Bay, their bodies preserved in permafrost like relics of a forgotten crusade. He founded Glückstadt on the Elbe in 1617, a rival to Hamburg, its quays crowded with whale oil barrels, and the stink of rendering blubber. But the empire was shrinking, its colonies pinpricks on a map dominated by Dutch and English flags. The Torstensson War of 1643-1645 was the death blow. Swedish General Lennart Torstensson marched into Jutland with 15,000 men, his boots crunching through the snow as Danish militias fled before him. The fleet, under Christian's son, Prince-elect Frederick, sailed to intercept the Swedish navy in the Bay of Kiel, but a storm scattered the Danes like chaff. The Swedes landed on Funen, burning villages and salting the fields, and by 1645 the Treaty of Brömsebro ceded Jämtland, Härjedalen, and the islands of Gotland and Ussel to Sweden. The Sound dues were split, the Baltic no longer a Danish lake. Christian IV died in 1648, his body racked with gout and his treasury empty, the bells of Copenhagen tolling for a king who had built castles and lost wars. His son Frederick III inherited a kingdom on its knees. The Second Northern War of 1658 saw Charles the Vex of Sweden march across the frozen belts, his horses' hooves ringing on the ice as Copenhagen braced for siege. The city held, its walls manned by students and burghers, its harbor choked with sunken hulks to bar the Swedish fleet. The Dutch came to the rescue, their Admiral Opdam smashing the Swedish navy at the Battle of the Sound in 1658, the water alive with fire and splintered timber. The Treaty of Roskilde in 1658 was a humiliation. Skåne, Blekinge, and Bohuslän lost forever, the eastern provinces that had been Danish since Valdemar the Great. Frederick clawed back some pride in 1660, retaking Bornholm in a daring amphibious assault, but the empire was a shadow. The absolute monarchy he introduced in 1660 was a desperate grasp at control. The nobility stripped of power, and the fleet reduced to a coastal guard. The Great Northern War of 1700-1721 was the final act. Denmark allied with Russia and Saxony against the boy king Charles the XIII of Sweden, dreaming of reclaiming Skåne. The fleet, under Admiral Niels Juel, won glory at the Battle of Køge Bay in 1677, its broadsides shattering the Swedish line, but the land war was a disaster. Charles invaded Zealand in 1700, his Karelians marching through the snow like wolves, and Copenhagen trembled. Peter the Great's Russians ravaged the Swedish coast, but Denmark gained nothing. The Treaty of Frederiksborg in 1720 confirmed the loss of the eastern provinces, and the Sound dues were the only remnant of maritime power. The fleet rotted at the wharves, its sailors press-ganged into Dutch service, its cannon sold for scrap. The colonial dream flickered on. The Danish West India Company bought St. Thomas in 1672, its plantations churning sugar and rum, its slave markets a stain on the Dannebrog. Tranquebar traded pepper until the British seized it in 1807, and the Gold Coast forts fell to the Ashanti in 1850. Greenland remained a whaling station, its Inuit kayaks bartering narwhal tusks for iron nails, its missionaries baptizing children with names like Hans Egede. But the empire was gone, its maps rolled up and stored in dusty archives, its songs sung only by old men in the taverns of Marstal. The 19th century was a slow bleeding. The British bombarded Copenhagen in 1807, their rockets setting the city ablaze and seizing the fleet to prevent it falling to Napoleon. The bombardment killed 2,000 civilians, the spire of Our Lady Church collapsing in a storm of fire, and Denmark emerged bankrupt and neutral. The loss of Norway in 1814, severed by the Treaty of Kiel, was a body blow. The union that had endured since 1380 dissolved in a stroke of Talleyrand's pen. The fleet, once the terror of the Baltic, became a ferry service for the Faroes and Iceland. The Second Schleswig War of 1864 was the coup de grace. Prussian and Austrian troops stormed the Donauwörth, their rifled guns tearing through the ancient ramparts as Danish soldiers fell in windrows. The fleet, outdated sail-of-the-line ships, cowered in Copenhagen harbor, unable to contest the ironclads of the new Germany. The Treaty of Vienna ceded Schleswig and Holstein, amputating the southern limb of the kingdom and leaving Denmark a small nation adrift in a world of giants, yet the sea still called. In the late 19th century, the Maersk family launched their first steamship from Svendborg, its funnel painted blue and its hold stuffed with butter and bacon for London. The Arctic explorer Knud Rasmussen mapped Greenland's ice cap, his dog sleds leaving tracks that the wind erased by morning. The fishermen of Skagen braved the North Sea in oak cutters, their nets heavy with cod, and their songs heavy with salt. The empire was dead, but the Danish spirit, cunning, resilient, wedded to the wave, lived on in the cooperatives of the folk high schools, in the windmills that spun above the dunes, in the quiet pride of a people who had once ruled the seas and now ruled their own small corner of the world with dignity. Today, the Øresund Bridge arcs across the water like a silver bow, its cables humming with traffic between Copenhagen and Malmö. The Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde cradles the bones of Skuldelev's ships, their oak ribs reconstructed by hands that will never know the bite of an oar. The cannons of Kronborg salute cruise ships instead of carracks, and the toll registers of Helsingør are digitized, their data flowing through fiber optic cables beneath the seabed. The empire is a ghost story now, told to children in picture books and tourists in gift shops. But stand on the cliffs of Grenland at twilight, where the Skagerrak meets the Kattegat and the waves clash in eternal war, and you can still hear it. The creak of rigging, the slap of sail, the low chant of rowers pulling through the mist. Denmark ruled the seas once, not with the thunder of empires, but with the patience of the tide. And the sea remembers. The empire's final breath was not a roar, but a sigh, exhaled across the ice of the Little Belt on a February morning in 1864, when the last Danish soldier fell at Dibble, his blood freezing into crimson lace on the snow. The Prussian bugles sounded the advance, their notes sharp as the bayonets that followed, and the ancient ramparts of the Dannevirke, earth and timber raised by Harold Bluetooth 1,000 years before, crumbled beneath the thunder of Krupp guns. The fleet, once the terror of the Baltic, lay chained in Copenhagen harbor, its masts stripped and its cannons spiked, unable to contest the ironclads that steamed past Helsingør with the black-red gold of the new Germany snapping at their sterns. The Treaty of Vienna that October carved away Schleswig and Holstein like a butcher jointing a whale, and Denmark shrank to its island core, a kingdom of windmills and butter, its maritime dreams reduced to the smoke of Maersk steamers and the creak of herring boats in the Skagerrak. Yet the sea does not forget. It keeps its own ledger, written in salt and tide, and Denmark's story did not end at Dibble. It simply turned the page. The loss of the duchies was a wound that festered for generations, but it also cauterized the fever of imperial ambition. The nation looked inward to the black soil of Jutland and the white beaches of Zealand, and discovered a different kind of power. The power of the cooperative, the folk high school, the quiet revolution of the small. In the fishing villages of Skagen, where the light is so pure it hurts the eyes, painters gathered in the 1870s to capture the crash of waves on canvas, their brushes dipped in the same blues and grays that had once dyed the sails of Knut's longships. In the shipyards of Svendborg, A.P. Müller launched the Laura in 1886, a modest steamer with a blue funnel and a hold full of bacon for London, the first seed of what would become the world's largest container fleet. The empire was dead, but the Danish genius for the sea, cunning, patient, wedded to the wind, lived on in rivets and ropes, in butter boxes and bilge pumps. The colonial fragments lingered like barnacles on a rotting hull. In the Caribbean, the Danish West Indies, St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix, continued to churn sugar and rum under the Dannebrog. Their plantations worked by African hands whose songs rose above the cane fields in languages the overseers could not understand. Charlotte Amalie harbor was a riot of color, red-tiled roofs, turquoise water, the black hulls of slave ships giving way to white-painted schooners flying the flags of a dozen nations. The governor's mansion on St. Thomas overlooked the anchorage like a stern father, its verandas shaded by mahogany trees and its cellars stocked with Madeira older than the Union itself. But the profits dwindled. The beet sugar of Europe undercut the cane, and the abolition of slavery in 1848 left the plantations hollow shells worked by freedmen who demanded wages the company could not pay. In 1917, as German U-boats prowled the Atlantic and the United States flexed its new muscles, Denmark sold the islands to Washington for $25 million in gold, enough to build a new navy, or so the politicians claimed. The handover ceremony on St. Thomas was a quiet affair. The Dannebrog lowered at sunset, the stars and stripes raised at dawn, the harbor guns firing a 21-gun salute that echoed across the water like a memory fading. Further east, Tranquebar lingered as a pepper-scented ghost. Fort Dansborg's red walls baked under the Coromandel sun, its cannon rusting in the monsoon rains, its chapel echoing with the hymns of Tamil converts. The Danish East India Company had dissolved in 1845. Its assets auctioned to British merchants who renamed the settlement Tharangambadi and forgot the Lutheran missionaries who had translated the Bible into Tamil. The last Danish governor, Peter Anker, sailed home in 1846 aboard the Christianus Sextus, his cabin stuffed with teak furniture and a parrot that swore in 3 languages. The fort became a ruin, its ramparts overgrown with banyan and bougainvillea, its dungeons home to bats and cobwebs. Yet the Tamil fishermen still launched their catamarans from the beach beneath the walls, their nets woven from coir and their songs older than the fort itself. In 2006, Danish archaeologists returned, brushing centuries of sand from the governor's palace, unearthing porcelain shards painted with the 3 lions and a silver spoon engraved with the monogram of Christian 4. The empire was dust, but its fingerprints lingered in the soil. On the Gold Coast, the story was bloodier. The forts at Christiansborg and Fredensborg, whitewashed walls rising from the surf like the bones of beached whales, traded gold, ivory, and human lives until the Ashanti Wars of the 19th century. Captains logged their cargoes in neat copper plate, 200 prime slaves, 50 tusks, 10 casks gunpowder. The dungeons beneath Christiansborg stank of despair, their walls scarred with the fingernails of the captive. When the British abolished the slave trade in 1807, the Danes followed suit, but the forts lingered as trading posts until 1850, when they were sold to Britain for $10,000, a pittance for the blood that had soaked their stones. The last Danish governor, Edward Carstensen, wrote in his journal, "We leave behind a legacy of shame and a harbor full of ghosts." The forts became prisons under British rule. Then museums, their cannon now silent sentinels over Accra's fishing boats. Greenland was the last redoubt, a continent of ice and silence where the Danish flag still flew. The colony had been re-established in 1721 by Hans Egede, a Lutheran pastor whose ship Hobbit battled pack ice and polar bears to plant a mission at Godthab. The Inuit called him Aput, the white man, and watched warily as he baptized their children and burned their shaman drums. The trade was in blubber and cryolite, the mineral that would one day feed aluminum smelters in Pittsburgh and Copenhagen. The Royal Greenland Trading Company held a monopoly tighter than the Sound dues, its factors doling out coffee and rifles in exchange for sealskins and narwhal tusks. The colony was a prison and a paradise. No roads, no trees, only the aurora borealis painting the sky in green fire and the crack of glaciers calving into the fjord. Knud Rasmussen, born in Ilulissat in 1879, crossed the ice cap on dog sleds, mapping a land no European had seen, his journals filled with Inuit legends and the smell of seal oil. In 1953, Greenland became a county of Denmark, its people granted citizenship and a voice in the Folketing. But the sea ice still dictated the rhythm of life, and the Danish Navy's Knud Rasmussen-class patrol vessels still nosed through the floes like the longships of old. The world wars passed over Denmark like storms over a reef. In 1914, the fleet was mobilized to guard neutrality, its minesweeper Lawson laying barriers in the belts while German and British submarines prowled the Skagerrak. The country emerged unscathed but impoverished, its butter and bacon feeding the belligerents while its shipyards built trawlers for the Faroes. In 1940, the Nazis came in a single morning, paratroopers dropping on Aalborg, panzers rolling across the Jutland border, the king watching from Amalienborg as the swastika rose over the citadel. The fleet scuttled itself in Copenhagen harbor, its sailors swimming ashore with explosives strapped to their backs, the Niels Jewel sinking in a pillar of flame that lit the night sky. The resistance was born in the boathouses of the Sound, saboteurs rowing out under cover of darkness to plant limpet mines on German freighters. The Fidsten group smuggled Jews to Sweden in fishing boats, their holds stuffed with children and Torah scrolls, the Skagerrak a highway of hope. When liberation came in May 1945, the harbor guns of Kronborg fired a salute that shattered windows in Helsingør, and the Dannebrog rose again over a nation that had never truly surrendered. The post-war world was a different sea. Denmark joined NATO in 1949, its frigates patrolling the Gaiuk Gap alongside American destroyers, its submarines lurking beneath the polar ice. The Marshall Plan rebuilt the shipyards, and Maersk grew fat on oil tankers and container ships. Its blue funnels a common sight from Rotterdam to Singapore. The sound dues were abolished in 1857, but the Øresund remained a choke point. Its bridge opened in 2000 with a ceremony attended by queens and presidents, its cables humming with traffic that once would have paid toll in silver marks. The fishing fleets of Esbjerg and Tiberun hauled cod and plaice until the quotas of the European Union strangled the industry, and the wind farms of Horns Rev rose like steel forests where once the longships sailed. The Navy shrank to a handful of frigates and patrol boats, their mission search and rescue and Arctic sovereignty. Their crews trained in Bergen and San Diego. Yet the past is never past. In the vaults of the National Archives in Copenhagen, the sound toll registers fill shelf after shelf, their pages brittle as autumn leaves, their ink faded but legible. Anno 1562, die 14 Juni, navis nomin Maria de Lübeck, solvi 12 marca profero elana. In the fjord of Roskilde, the Viking Ship Museum launches reconstructed longships every summer, their oars dipping in perfect unison as tourists pull with the ghosts of housecarls. In the cellars of Kronborg, the logs of the castle garrison record the passage of every ship from 1580 to 1857. Their captains' names a roll call of the world: Vandermeer, O'Donnell, Al-Rashid, Hansen. The Empire is a museum piece now, its cannon rusting on the ramparts. Its banners faded in glass cases, but stand on the quay at Helsingør at dusk. When the gulls wheel above the ferries and the lights of Helsingborg flicker across the water, and you can still hear it, the creak of rigging, the slap of sail, the low chant of rowers pulling through the mist. The Empire was never about land. It was about the sea, its moods, its mercies, its cruelties. Denmark ruled the waves not with the brute force of Rome or the gold of Spain, but with the cunning of the raven and the patience of the gull. From Harold Bluetooth's ring fort at Jelling to the container cranes of Aarhus, the story is the same. A small nation that looked to the horizon and saw not a barrier, but a highway. The longships are gone, their oak ribs food for worms in the fjord mud. The carracks and frigates are gone, their timbers splintered in the shipbreakers' yards. The slave forts and pepper factories are gone, their stones reclaimed by jungle and surf. But the sea remains, and with it the Danish genius for riding its back, whether in a kayak off Nuuk, a windsurfer off Klitmøller, or a Maersk Triple E slicing through the Strait of Malacca at 20 knots. The forgotten empire of the North lives in the salt on a sailor's lips, in the wind that fills a spinnaker off Skagen, in the quiet pride of a people who once made the Baltic their lake and the Atlantic their highway. It lives in the Dannebrog that flies from every flagpole on June 5th, in the midsummer bonfires that light the beaches from Bornholm to Blovand, in the skulls raised in waterfront bars from Nuuk to Nairobi. It lives in the DNA of a nation that still measures its wealth in butter and wind, its security in alliances and icebreakers, its identity in the crash of waves on a granite shore. The empire is forgotten by the world, but not by the sea. And the sea, as every Dane knows, has a long memory. The 20th century dawned on Denmark like a pale sun over the Kattegat, thin light on a nation that had learned to live within its skin. The empire was a ghost story now, told in yellowed schoolbooks and the creak of museum floors. But the sea was still there, cold, gray, and hungry. The fishing fleets of Esbjerg and Skagen put out at dawn, their diesel engines coughing blue smoke into the wind, their nets heavy with cod and plaice until the quotas came, drawn by bureaucrats in Brussels who had never smelled salt or felt the deck lurch beneath their feet. The shipyards of Odense and Aalborg turned from oak and iron to steel and rivets, launching tankers and bulk carriers under the Maersk star, their hulls painted the same blue as the royal arms. The Navy shrank to a handful of frigates and corvettes, their mission no longer conquest but presence, patrolling the Gjök Gap, escorting convoys through the Skagerrak, keeping an eye on the Soviet submarines that nose through the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap like steel sharks. The 20th century dawned on Denmark like a pale sun over the Kattegat, thin light on a nation that had learned to live within its skin. The empire was a ghost story now, told in yellowed schoolbooks and the creak of museum floors. But the sea was still there, cold, gray, and hungry. The fishing fleets of Esbjerg and Skagen put out at dawn, their diesel engines coughing blue smoke into the wind, their nets heavy with cod and plaice until the quotas came, drawn by bureaucrats in Brussels who had never smelled salt or felt the deck lurch beneath their feet. The shipyards of Odense and Aalborg turned from oak and iron to steel and rivets, launching tankers and bulk carriers under the Maersk star, their hulls painted the same blue as the royal arms. The Navy shrank to a handful of frigates and corvettes. Their mission no longer conquest but presence, patrolling the Gjök Gap, escorting convoys through the Skagerrak, keeping an eye on the Soviet submarines that nosed through the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap like steel sharks. The First World War was a sideshow. Denmark declared neutrality on August 1, 1914, and the fleet mobilized to guard it. Minesweepers like the Lawson and Sulven laid barriers across the belts, their crews working by lantern light while the great powers tore Europe apart. German U-boats prowled the Skagerrak, their periscopes slicing the water like knife blades, and British cruisers shadowed the Jutland coast, their searchlights sweeping the dunes for contraband. The Sound dues were long gone, but the Øresund remained a choke point, and Danish pilots guided neutral ships through the Narrows for a fee measured in butter and bacon. The war enriched the nation. Factories in Copenhagen turned out condensed milk and margarine, shipyards repaired damaged freighters, and the black soil of Funen grew wheat for both sides. When the armistice came in 1918, Denmark emerged unscathed but uneasy, its southern border a raw wound where Schleswig still bled under German rule. The interwar years were a golden haze. Copenhagen bloomed with jazz and Art Deco, the Tivoli gardens lit by electric bulbs that chased away the long northern nights. The Maersk Line expanded, its blue funnels a common sight from Rotterdam to Bangkok, its captains logging voyages in neat copperplate while their wives waited in villas overlooking the Sound. The fishing fleets modernized, their wooden cutters giving way to steel trawlers with echo sounders and wireless sets, their crews still singing the old shanties as they hauled nets heavy with herring. The Navy commissioned the coastal defense ship Niels Juel in 1932, a sleek vessel with 15-centimeter guns and a silhouette like a greyhound. Its christening a national holiday with bunting and brass bands. But the storm was gathering. In Germany, a corporal with a mustache rose to power, and his gaze turned north. April 9, 1940, came like a slap. At 4:15 a.m., German troops crossed the Jutland border, their motorcycles roaring through the dawn mist. Paratroopers dropped on Aalborg airfield, their silk shoots blooming like deadly flowers, and the Luftwaffe bombed the citadel in Copenhagen. The government capitulated in 6 hours, the king watching from Amalienborg as the swastika rose over the palace. The fleet was ordered to scuttle. In Copenhagen harbor, the cruiser Niels Juel fired its guns into its own magazines, the explosion lighting the sky like a second sun. Sailors swam ashore with explosives strapped to their backs, sinking torpedo boats and minesweepers in the channels. The coastal defense ship Peter Skram went down with all hands, its captain standing on the bridge as the water closed over him. 84 vessels were lost in a single night, their hulls settling into the mud like the bones of a drowned giant. The occupation was a slow suffocation. The Germans demanded butter, bacon, and silence. The resistance was born in boathouses and basements, its weapons smuggled in herring barrels and its messages tapped out in Morse on fishing boat radios. The Hvidsten group operated from a tavern near Randers, its members rowing Jews across the Kattegat to Sweden in open boats, the children drugged with laudanum to keep them quiet. Over 7,000 were saved, their names whispered in Malmö safehouses and carried south on the Underground Railroad to Palestine. Saboteurs planted limpet mines on German freighters in the Sound, the explosions muffled by fog and the screams of the drowning. The Churchill gang in Aarhus derailed trains with homemade bombs, their leader executed by firing squad in Rivingen. His last words a curse in Jutland dialect. Liberation came on May 5, 1945. The BBC broadcast the news at 8:35 p.m., and Copenhagen erupted. People poured into the streets waving homemade Dannebrogs and kissing strangers. The harbor guns of Kronborg fired a salute that shattered windows in Helsingør, and the resistance fighters emerged from hiding, their armbands red and white like the flag itself. The Germans surrendered without a fight, their commander signing the papers in a schoolhouse near Lundby. The fleet was gone, but the sea was free again, and the first fishing boats put out at dawn, their crews singing as they hauled nets heavy with cod. The Cold War was a different kind of occupation. Denmark joined NATO in 1949, its frigates patrolling the Baltic alongside American destroyers, its submarines lurking beneath the polar ice. The HDMS Peter Skram, a new missile frigate launched in 1965, carried Harpoon missiles and a crew trained in Norfolk, Virginia, its silhouette a reminder that the sea was still a battlefield. The Greenland base at Thule became a listening post, its radar dome staring north at the Soviet Bear. The fishing fleets pushed into the North Atlantic, their factory ships processing cod off Newfoundland, until the 200-mile limit in 1977 drove them home. The Maersk line grew into a colossus, its container ships the length of city blocks, their holds stacked with everything from iPhones to frozen shrimp. The blue funnel with the white star became a symbol of Danish soft power. Its captains saluted in ports from Valparaiso to Yokohama. The welfare state rose on the ruins of war. The folk high schools taught democracy and dairy farming, their graduates founding cooperatives that turned butter into gold. The shipyards of Odense built supertankers for the oil boom, their slipways echoing with the clang of steel and the hiss of welders' torches. The wind farms of Horns Rev spun above the North Sea, their blades harvesting the same gales that had once filled the sails of longships. The Navy shrank to a green water force, its Absalon-class support ships doubling as humanitarian platforms, delivering aid to tsunami zones and evacuating civilians from war zones. The HDMS Esbern Snare rescued refugees in the Mediterranean in 2015, its deck crowded with Syrians and Eritreans, their eyes wide at the sight of the Dannebrog. The Arctic became the new frontier. Climate change melted the ice, opening the Northwest Passage and revealing minerals beneath the seabed. Denmark claimed the continental shelf north of Greenland, its scientists planting flags on Hans Island in a polite spat with Canada. The patrol vessel Knud Rasmussen nosed through the flows, its crew mapping bathymetry and monitoring Russian submarines. The Inuit of Greenland demanded home rule, granted in 1979, and self-rule in 2009, their parliament in Nuuk flying the red and white Erfalasorput alongside the Dannebrog. The fishing fleets of Ilulissat hauled halibut and shrimp, their catches flown to Copenhagen in refrigerated containers. The empire was a memory, but the sea was still Denmark's highway, its currents carrying container ships and cruise liners, its winds powering turbines and dreams. The 21st century is a globalized sea. Maersk is the world's largest container line, its Emma Maersk-class ships carrying 18,000 TEUs, their hulls longer than the Empire State Building is tall. The Blue Funnel is a common sight in Singapore, Rotterdam, and Los Angeles, its captains logging voyages in tablets and satellites. The Navy's Iver Huitfeldt-class frigates carry SM-2 missiles and a crew of 165, their mission anti-piracy off the Horn of Africa and disaster relief in the Caribbean. The fishing fleets are shadows of their former selves, their quotas dictated by Brussels and their boats tied up in Tiberun, but the aquaculture farms of the Limfjord churn salmon and mussels for export. The wind farms of the North Sea generate half the nation's electricity, their blades turning in the same gales that once drove the longships to England. The past is never past. In the summer, the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde launches the Havingston for Glendalough, a reconstructed longship rowed by volunteers in linen tunics, their oars dipping in perfect unison as tourists cheer from the shore. In Helsingør, the cannons of Kronborg fire blank salutes for cruise ships, their smoke drifting across the water like a memory. In Nuuk, the cathedral bells ring for Inuit weddings, their sound mingling with the cry of gulls and the diesel throb of fishing boats. The empire is a museum piece now, its cannon rusting on the ramparts, its banners faded in glass cases, but the sea is still there, cold, gray, and hungry. Stand on the cliffs of Grennan at twilight, where the Skagerrak meets the Kattegat and the waves clash in eternal war, and you can still hear it, the creak of rigging, the slap of sail, the low chant of rowers pulling through the mist. The empire was never about land. It was about the sea, its moods, its mercies, its cruelties. Denmark ruled the waves once, not with the thunder of empires, but with the patience of the tide. And the tide, as every Dane knows, always returns. The 21st century is a sea of steel and glass, where the old gods of wind and wave have been tamed by algorithms and satellites, yet Denmark still rides the crest. The Maersk Empire, born from a single steamer in 1904, now commands a fleet of over 700 vessels. their blue hulls slicing through every ocean like the longships of old. Only these carry not warriors but refrigerators, televisions, and the endless hunger of global trade. The Tripoli class, launched in 2013, are floating cathedrals of commerce. 400 meters long, 59 meters wide, carrying 18,000 containers stacked like the bricks of a digital Babylon. Their engines burn low-sulfur fuel and scrub their exhaust through towering funnels, their captains guided by GPS and weather models that predict storms before the clouds form. The Emma Maersk can cross the Atlantic in 8 days, its wake a white scar on the blue skin of the sea, its cargo enough to fill every supermarket in Scandinavia. The company's headquarters in Copenhagen is a glass palace overlooking the Øresund, its lobby filled with models of ships from the Laura to the Madrid Maersk, their names a litany of ports and dreams. The Navy has shrunk to a whisper, but it still speaks. The Ivar Huitfeldt-class frigates, Ivar Huitfeldt, Peter Willemoes, Niels Juel, are sleek predators of the Baltic, their radar masts piercing the sky like the masts of old. Armed with Harpoon missiles and 76mm guns, they patrol the Guyuk Gap alongside NATO allies, their crews trained in simulators that recreate the fog of the Skagerrak and the ice of the Davis Strait. The Absalon-class support ships are floating Swiss Army knives, helicopter decks, hospital bays, and cargo holds that can carry tanks or refugees. In 2011, the Esbern Snare hunted pirates off the Horn of Africa, its Lynx helicopter buzzing over dhows like a dragonfly, its boarding teams rappelling onto decks slick with fish guts and fear. In 2021, the Absalon evacuated Danish citizens from Kabul, its deck crowded with Afghans clutching children and hope. The fleet is small, 16 combat vessels, but it punches above its weight, its sailors wearing the Dannebrog on their shoulders like a badge of quiet competence. The Arctic is the new North Sea. The ice is melting, and with it the old certainties. The Northwest Passage is opening, and the northern sea route along Russia's coast is navigable for half the year. Denmark claims the continental shelf north of Greenland, its scientists planting flags on Hans Island in a polite spat with Canada, their diplomats trading whiskey and aquavit over maps drawn in Copenhagen and Ottawa. The patrol vessel Knud Rasmussen, named for the explorer who mapped the ice cap on dog sleds, noses through the floes, its hull reinforced against the pressure, its crew mapping bathymetry and monitoring Chinese research vessels that fly the red flag of the People's Republic. The Lauga Koch-class icebreakers are on the drawing board, their designs inspired by the nuclear breakers of Murmansk, their mission to keep the sea lanes open and the Danish claim alive. The Inuit of Greenland fish for halibut and shrimp, their catches flown to Copenhagen in refrigerated containers, their parliament in Nuuk debating independence and royalties from the rare earths beneath the ice. The green transition is a revolution at sea. The wind farms of Horns Rev and Krieger's Flak spin above the North Sea, their blades harvesting the same gales that once filled the sails of longships. The Ørsted Company, named for the physicist who discovered electromagnetism, builds turbines the size of cathedrals, their foundations driven into the seabed by ships that look like floating factories. The Vol-au-Vent jack-up vessel lifts blades longer than the wingspan of a 747, its crane swinging in the wind like the arms of a giant. The electricity flows through undersea cables to the grid, powering the lights of Copenhagen and the servers of Novo Nordisk. The fishing fleets are shadows of their former selves, their quotas dictated by Brussels and their boats tied up in Tiburon. But the aquaculture farms of the Limfjord churn salmon and mussels for export, their pens floating like rafts in the calm waters. The mussel farm project off Langeland grows blue mussels on ropes, their harvest cleaned by the tides and shipped to Paris in refrigerated trucks. The past is a living thing. In the summer, the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde launches the Havingston Fraglendalo, a reconstructed longship rowed by volunteers in linen tunics, their oars dipping in perfect unison as tourists cheer from the shore. The ship is a time machine, its oak ribs caulked with wool and tar, its sail woven from flax, its crew chanting in Old Norse as they pull through the fjord. In Helsingør, the cannons of Kronborg fire blank salutes for cruise ships, their smoke drifting across the water like a memory. The MS Maritime Museum of Denmark in Helsingør is a subterranean wonder, its halls carved into the dry dock where the Dannebro yacht once wintered, its exhibits telling the story of the sea from the Skuldelev ships to the Emma Maersk. In Nuuk, the cathedral bells ring for Inuit weddings, their sound mingling with the cry of gulls and the diesel throb of fishing boats. The Greenland National Museum displays the Chilakitsoq mummies, their faces frozen in time, their parkas stitched with the same sinew that once lashed the skins of Umiaks. The empire is a museum piece now, but its spirit lives in the salt on a sailor's lips, in the wind that fills a spinnaker off Skagen, in the quiet pride of a people who once made the Baltic their lake and the Atlantic their highway. The Dannebrog flies from every flagpole on June 5th, its white cross on red a symbol of defiance and continuity. The midsummer bonfires light the beaches from Bornholm to Blåvand, their flames leaping into the night sky like the fires of Valdemar's siege towers. The skulls raised in waterfront bars from Nuuk to Nairobi echo the toasts of Nutt's housecarls, the aquavit burning like the Greek fire of old. The empire is forgotten by the world, but not by the sea. And the sea, as every Dane knows, has a long memory. The story is not over. The ice is melting, the trade routes are shifting, and the wind is rising. The Maersk McKinney Miller class ships are being retrofitted with dual fuel engines that burn methanol and ammonia, their exhaust scrubbed clean by catalysts and scrubbers. The Laura Maersk, launched in 2023, is the world's first methanol-powered container ship, its green fuel produced from wind and biomass, its voyage from Copenhagen to Shanghai a statement of intent. The Navy's MPV-80 class patrol vessels are on the drawing board, their designs inspired by the Absalon class, their mission to police the Arctic and the Baltic in an age of great power competition. The Arctic Command in Nuuk coordinates the effort, its officers poring over satellite imagery and ice charts, their radios crackling with the voices of icebreakers and fishing boats. The future is a sea of uncertainty, but Denmark is ready. The cooperatives that once turned butter into gold now turn wind into watts, their turbines spinning above the waves like the windmills of old. The folk high schools teach coding and climate science, their graduates building apps that predict storms and optimize shipping routes. The shipyards of Lindu build jack-up vessels for the offshore wind industry, their slipways echoing with the clang of steel and the hiss of welders' torches. The A.P. Miller Foundation funds museums and scholarships, its endowment a legacy of the empire that once was. The Danish Maritime Authority regulates the fleet, its inspectors boarding ships in Singapore and Rotterdam, their clipboards filled with checklists and carbon footprints. The empire was never about land. It was about the sea, its moods, its mercies, its cruelties. Denmark ruled the waves once, not with the thunder of empires, but with the patience of the tide. And the tide, as every Dane knows, always returns. The longships are gone, their oak ribs food for worms in the fjord mud. The carracks and frigates are gone, their timbers splintered in the shipbreakers' yards. The slave forts and pepper factories are gone, their stones reclaimed by jungle and surf. But the sea remains, and with it the Danish genius for riding its back, whether in a kayak off Nuuk, a windsurfer off Klitmøller, or a Maersk Triple-E slicing through the Strait of Malacca at 20 knots. Stand on the cliffs of Grinnen at twilight, where the Skagerrak meets the Kattegat and the waves clash in eternal war, and you can still hear it. The creak of rigging, the slap of sail, the low chant of rowers pulling through the mist. The empire is a ghost story now, told to children in picture books and tourists in gift shops, but the sea is still there, cold, gray, and hungry. And Denmark, small as it is, still sails. The future is a sea of light and shadow, where the old gods of wind and wave have been bound by code and carbon budgets, yet Denmark still steers by the stars. The Laura Maersk glides through the Strait of Malacca at 18 knots, her engines humming on green methanol distilled from wind and biomass, her wake a silver ribbon on the black water. Her captain, a woman from Tiburon, whose grandfather fished cod off Newfoundland, watches the radar screen where the ghosts of container stacks flicker like the ribs of a longship. The ship is a floating city, 400 meters of steel and algorithms, her hold stacked with 18,000 TEUs, iPhones from Shenzhen, avocados from Peru, wind turbine blades from Aalborg. The bridge is silent save for the soft chime of the ECDS and the low throb of the main engine, its exhaust scrubbed clean by catalysts that turn sulfur into salt. The Laura is the first of her kind, but not the last. By 2030, half the Maersk fleet will burn green fuels, their funnels painted the same blue as the Royal Arms. their wakes a promise of a cleaner sea. The Arctic is the new frontier, and the ice is singing its death song. The Northwest Passage is open for 120 days a year, and the northern sea route along Russia's coast is navigable for 150. The canoed Rasmussen-class patrol vessels, canoed, Lage Einar, nose through the floes, their hulls reinforced against the pressure. Their crews mapping bathymetry and monitoring Chinese icebreakers that fly the red flag of the People's Republic. The Arctic Command in Nuuk coordinates the effort, its officers poring over satellite imagery and ice charts, their radios crackling with the voices of fishing boats and research vessels. The HDMS Triton, a new ice-breaking frigate launched in 2028, carries drones that map the seabed and helicopters that drop sonar buoys, its mission to keep the sea lanes open and the Danish claim alive. The Inuit of Greenland fish for halibut and shrimp. Their catches flown to Copenhagen in refrigerated containers. Their parliament in Nuuk debating independence and royalties from the rare earths beneath the ice. The green transition is a revolution at sea. The wind farms of Horns Rev, Kriegers Flak, and the new Vesterhav array spin above the North Sea, their blades harvesting the same gales that once filled the sails of longships. The Ørsted Company builds turbines the size of cathedrals, their foundations driven into the seabed by ships that look like floating factories. The Volovant jack-up vessel lifts blades longer than the wingspan of a 747, its cranes swinging in the wind like the arms of a giant. The electricity flows through undersea cables to the grid, powering the lights of Copenhagen and the servers of Novo Nordisk. The Power 2X plants on Bornholm turn wind into hydrogen and ammonia, their output piped to the Laura Maersk and her sisters, their engines burning the future. The fishing fleets are shadows of their former selves, their quotas dictated by Brussels and their boats tied up in Tiberun. But the aquaculture farms of the Limfjord churn salmon and mussels for export, their pens floating like rafts in the calm waters. The mussel farm project off Langeland grows blue mussels on ropes, their harvest cleaned by the tides and shipped to Paris in refrigerated trucks. The digital sea is a new kind of ocean. The Maersk TradeLens platform tracks every container in real time, its blockchain ledger a map of global trade. The Digital Container Project embeds sensors in every box, their data streaming to Copenhagen where algorithms predict delays and optimize routes. The port of Aarhus is a smart port, its cranes guided by AI and its trucks electric, their batteries charged by the wind farms offshore. The Copenhagen-Malmö port handles 20 million TEUs a year, its quays crowded with autonomous straddle carriers that glide like ghosts in the fog. The Danish Maritime Authority regulates the fleet, its inspectors boarding ships in Singapore and Rotterdam via drone, their clipboards replaced by tablets and augmented reality glasses. The Maritime Cyber Command in Aarhus hunts hackers who target the GPS and ECADIS, their war fought in code and firewalls. The Navy is a green water force, but it still speaks. The MPV-80 class patrol vessels, Diana, Freya, Rhoda, are on the slipways, their designs inspired by the Absalon class. Their mission to police the Arctic and the Baltic in an age of great power competition. The HDMS Niels Juel, a new air defense frigate launched in 2030, carries SM-6 missiles and a crew of 165, its radar mast piercing the sky like the masts of old. The Flyv Fisken-class patrol boats are retired, their hulls repurposed as artificial reefs off Granaa, their cannon now home to cod and crab. The Arctic Drone Wing in Nuuk operates the MQ-4C Triton, its drones flying 24-hour missions over the ice cap, their cameras mapping cracks and calving glaciers. The HDMS Esbjørn Snare is a museum ship in Copenhagen, its deck crowded with schoolchildren who trace the dents of Somali pirate bullets and dream of the sea. The past is a living thing. In the summer, the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde launches the Havingsten fra Glendalough, a reconstructed longship rowed by volunteers in linen tunics, their oars dipping in perfect unison as tourists cheer from the shore. The ship is a time machine, its oak ribs caulked with wool and tar, its sail woven from flax, its crew chanting in Old Norse as they pull through the fjord. In Helsingør, the cannons of Kronborg fire blank salutes for cruise ships, their smoke drifting across the water like a memory. The MS Maritime Museum of Denmark in Helsingør is a subterranean wonder, its halls carved into the dry dock where the Dannebro yacht once wintered, its exhibits telling the story of the sea from the Skoldelv ships to the Laura Maersk. In Nuuk, the cathedral bells ring for Inuit weddings, their sound mingling with the cry of gulls and the diesel throb of fishing boats. The Greenland National Museum displays the Qilakitsoq mummies, their faces frozen in time. Their parkas stitched with the same sinew that once lashed the skins of Umiaks. The empire is a museum piece now, but its spirit lives in the salt on a sailor's lips, in the wind that fills a spinnaker off Skagen, in the quiet pride of a people who once made the Baltic their lake and the Atlantic their highway. The Dannebrog flies from every flagpole on June 5th, its white cross on red a symbol of defiance and continuity. The midsummer bonfires light the beaches from Bornholm to Blovand, their flames leaping into the night sky like the fires of Valdemar's siege towers. The skulls raised in waterfront bars from Nuuk to Nairobi echo the toasts of Knut's housecarls, the aquavit burning like the Greek fire of old. The empire is forgotten by the world, but not by the sea. And the sea, as every Dane knows, has a long memory. The story is not over. The ice is melting, the trade routes are shifting, and the wind is rising. The Maersk Launcher-class ships are on the drawing board, their designs inspired by the Triple E class, their engines burning ammonia and hydrogen, their hulls built from recycled steel and carbon fiber. The Arctic Command is expanding, its new base at Pituffik a city of glass and steel, its runways long enough for F-35s and its docks deep enough for icebreakers. The Greenland Institute of Natural Resources maps the fisheries, its scientists tagging halibut and shrimp, their data feeding the quotas that keep the stocks alive. The Danish Arctic Council chairs the rotating presidency, its diplomats negotiating with Russia and China over the rules of the new sea. The future is a sea of uncertainty, but Denmark is ready. The cooperatives that once turned butter into gold now turn wind into watts, their turbines spinning above the waves like the windmills of old. The folk high schools teach coding and climate science, their graduates building apps that predict storms and optimize shipping routes. The shipyards of Lindu build jack-up vessels for the offshore wind industry, their slipways echoing with the clang of steel and the hiss of welders' torches. The A.P. Møller Foundation funds museums and scholarships, its endowment a legacy of the empire that once was. The Danish Maritime Authority regulates the fleet, its inspectors boarding ships in Singapore and Rotterdam via drone, their clipboards replaced by tablets and augmented reality glasses. The empire was never about land. It was about the sea, its moods, its mercies, its cruelties. Denmark ruled the waves once, not with the thunder of empires, but with the patience of the tide. And the tide, as every Dane knows, always returns. The longships are gone, their oak ribs, food for worms in the fjord mud. The carracks and frigates are gone, their timbers splintered in the shipbreakers' yards. The slave forts and pepper factories are gone, their stones reclaimed by jungle and surf. But the sea remains, and with it the Danish genius for riding its back, whether in a kayak off Nuuk, a windsurfer off Klitmøller, or a Maersk Triple E slicing through the Strait of Malacca at 20 knots. Stand on the cliffs of Grennen at twilight, where the Skagerrak meets the Kattegat and the waves clash in eternal war, and you can still hear it, the creak of rigging, the slap of sail, the low chant of rowers pulling through the mist. The empire is a ghost story now, told to children in picture books and tourists in gift shops, but the sea is still there, cold, gray, and hungry, and Denmark, small as it is, still sails. The year's 2045 and the sea has changed its voice. The Kattegat is no longer the sullen gray of old sagas. It shimmers with the green glow of algae farms that stretch from Anholt to Samsu, their floating rings tended by autonomous drones that skim the surface like water striders. The wind farms have grown into archipelagos of steel, Thor, Freya, Valkyrie, their blades 300 meters tall, their foundations rooted in the bones of ancient shipwrecks. The Maersk Venturer-class ships glide past at 25 knots, their hulls woven from carbon fiber and recycled plastic, their engines silent on hydrogen cracked from the same wind that turns the turbines. The Maersk McKinney Møller II, launched in 2040, carries 24,000 TEUs in a hold cooled by liquid air, her bridge empty save for a single officer who monitors the AI that steers her from Copenhagen to Shanghai in 6 days. The blue funnel is gone. In its place, a holographic star pulses above the superstructure visible from orbit. The Arctic is a highway now. The Northwest Passage is open year-round, and the Northern Sea Route is a 6-lane freeway of ice-strengthened hulls. The HDMS Valdemar Atterdag, a nuclear-powered icebreaker launched in 2038, leads convoys through the Bering Strait, her reactors humming like the heart of a dragon, her drones mapping the seabed for rare earths and methane hydrates. The Arctic Command in Nuuk is a city of glass and geothermal heat. Its runways long enough for hypersonic cargo planes. Its docks deep enough for the Maersk Arctic-class bulk carriers that haul iron ore from Baffin Island to Esbjerg. The Inuit of Greenland fish for turbocharged salmon bred in offshore pens. Their catches flown to Tokyo in electric cargo drones. Their parliament in Nuuk debating full independence and a seat at the Arctic Council table. The Erfalasorput flies beside the Dannebrog, and the children speak Kalaallisut in English. Their textbooks filled with stories of Knud Rasmussen and the Laura Maersk. The Navy is a ghost fleet, but it still hunts. The MPV 100 class patrol vessels, Ran, Aegir, Njord, are unmanned surface vessels that patrol the EEZ with swarms of underwater drones. Their sensors sniffing for illegal trawlers and Chinese submarines. The HDMS Absalon II, a hybrid frigate launched in 2042, carries railguns and laser turrets, her crew of 80 augmented by AI that predicts pirate attacks and storms. The Flyv Fisken-class reefs off Grena are now marine sanctuaries, their hulls encrusted with coral and patrolled by robotic fish that zap poachers with mild electric shocks. The Arctic Drone Wing in Patuffik operates the MQ-9C Reaper, its drones flying 48-hour missions over the pole, their cameras mapping the retreat of the ice cap and the advance of the tundra. The digital sea is a new kind of empire. The Maersk Quantum platform tracks every container, every fish, every gust of wind in real time. Its quantum ledger a map of global trade that no hacker can crack. The port of Copenhagen is a floating city, its quays automated and its cranes electric, their batteries charged by the tidal turbines in the Øresund. The Danish Maritime Authority regulates the fleet with satellites and blockchain. Its inspectors boarding ships in Singapore via hologram, their avatars walking the decks in augmented reality. The Maritime Cyber Command in Aarhus is a fortress of code, its analysts hunting ransomware in the GPS streams and deepfakes in the shipping manifests. The Digital Twin Project mirrors every ship in virtual space, its simulations predicting collisions and carbon footprints before they happen. The green transition is complete. The last diesel engine was retired in 2040. Its hull recycled into the blades of a wind turbine off Horns Rev. The Power-to-X plants on Bornholm and Fano turn wind and wave into hydrogen, ammonia, and e-methanol, their output piped to the Maersk Venturer and her sisters, their engines burning the future. The aquaculture farms of the Limfjord churn lab-grown tuna and seaweed, their pens floating like rafts in the calm waters, their harvest shipped to Mars colonies in vacuum-sealed pods. The Mussel Farm project off Langeland grows blue mussels on carbon sequestering ropes, their shells ground into cement that builds the seawalls of a rising world. The Ørsted Company builds floating solar farms in the tropics, their panels tethered to the seabed by cables that double as data highways. The past is a living thing. In the summer, the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde launches the Havingston II, a carbon fiber longship rowed by neural-linked volunteers, their oars dipping in perfect unison as tourists cheer from drone cameras. The ship is a time machine, its hull 3D printed from recycled plastic, its sail woven from spider silk, its crew chanting in Old Norse as they pull through the fjord. In Helsingør, the cannons of Kronborg fire lasers salutes for quantum cruise ships, their beams painting the water in rainbow arcs. The MS Maritime Museum of Denmark in Helsingør is a metaverse wonder, its halls carved into the quantum cloud where avatars walk the decks of the Skuldelev ships and the Emma Maersk. In Nuuk, the cathedral bells ring for Inuit weddings, their sound mingling with the hum of electric snowmobiles and the cry of gulls. The Greenland National Museum displays the Chilakitsok mummies in climate-controlled pods, their faces frozen in time, their parkas stitched with the same sinew that once lashed the skins of Umiaks. The Empire is a neural network now, its nodes in every port and every turbine, its memory in every wave. The Dannebrog flies from every drone and every satellite, its white cross on red a symbol of defiance and continuity. The midsummer bonfires light the beaches from Bornholm to Blovand, their flames projected into the metaverse for the diaspora in Sydney and Seattle. The skulls, raised in waterfront bars from Newark to Nairobi, echo the toasts of Knut's House Carls. the aquavit replaced by hydrogen-infused water that burns like the Greek fire of old. The empire is forgotten by the world, but not by the sea. And the sea, as every Dane knows, has a long memory. The story is not over. The ice is gone, the trade routes are skyways, and the wind is a data stream. The Maersk launcher-class ships are in orbit, their hulls built from lunar regolith and Martian iron, their engines burning fusion and ambition. The Arctic Command is a lunar base, its domes heated by geothermal taps into the Greenland mantle, its telescopes mapping the stars for the next frontier. The Greenland Institute of Natural Resources farms the clouds, its scientists seeding algae blooms that sequester carbon and feed the world. The Danish Arctic Council chairs the solar system, its diplomats negotiating with Mars and the Belt over the rules of the new sea. The future is a sea of light, but Denmark is ready. The cooperatives that once turned butter into gold now turn photons into power, their solar farms orbiting the sun like the windmills of old. The folk high schools teach quantum physics and asteroid mining, their graduates building habitats on Ceres and drones for the Jovian moons. The shipyards of Lindu build starships, their slipways echoing with the clang of carbon and the hiss of plasma torches. The A.P. Miller Foundation funds colonies and scholarships, its endowment a legacy of the empire that once was. The Danish Maritime Authority regulates the solar fleet, its inspectors boarding ships in Lagrange points via wormhole, their clipboards replaced by neural links and quantum keys. The empire was never about land. It was about the sea, its moods, its mercies, its cruelties. Denmark ruled the waves once, not with the thunder of empires, but with the patience of the tide. And the tide, as every Dane knows, always returns. The longships are gone, their oak ribs dust in the fjord mud. The carracks and frigates are gone, their timbers stardust in the shipbreakers' yards. The slave forts and pepper factories are gone, their stones asteroids in the belt, but the sea remains. And with it the Danish genius for riding its back, whether in a kayak off Nuuk, a windsurfer off Klitmøller, or a Maersk starship slicing through the asteroid belt at 0.1 C. Stand on the cliffs of Grennen at twilight, where the Skagerrak meets the Kattegat and the waves clash in eternal war, and you can still hear it. The creak of rigging, the slap of sail, the low chant of rowers pulling through the mist. The empire is a ghost story now, told to children in neural implants and tourists in holodecks. But the sea is still there, cold, gray, and hungry, and Denmark, small as it is, still sails. The empire is forgotten by the world, but not by the stars, and the stars, as every Dane knows, have a long memory.